All right, I think we're ready to get started. We have a lot of people here, so thank you everybody who showed up this morning. First day of Big Data London. My name is Tomer Shiran. I'm the founder of Dremio, open data lakehouse company. And pleased to have here with me Mark from Maersk. And thanks for joining.
No worries.
All right. So Mark, you run data and analytics and AI at Maersk. And I think probably most of the people here in the audience have seen the name Maersk on different containers, on highways, on trucks, etc. But there's a whole lot more to it and enormous scale. So why don't we start just by telling the audience here a little bit about Maersk as a company.
Yeah, I'll do that. But first of all, I will explain. Normally, I don't just wear a white T-shirt, but I did the incredibly clever thing of having my flu jab this morning at 8 o'clock. So I'm now sweating like profusely, and I've got a banging headache. So perfect one on that. And I have got a shirt, but I've had to take that off because I'm too hot. So Maersk, a lot of people think we are just shipping containers. We're not. We're global, or we believe the leading global integrator of logistics. What does that mean? It means we can do everything for customers from shipping containers, obviously by sea, but we've also got aircraft, we've got thousands of trucks, hundreds of warehouses globally. So we sort of tend to deal with people that want any part or every part of that logistics business covering. Two things of note. Last week we had the very first carbon neutral ship. Jesus, was I that bad? Sorry about that. If anybody else wants to leave, knock yourself out. Don't bother. We had the very first carbon neutral ship arrive in Copenhagen. So traditionally, sea vessels have been terribly polluting. This one isn't. Completely carbon neutral. That's a first for us. And we're on a drive to net zero. Second interesting fact is if you take our biggest ship, vessel I should call them actually, if anybody from Maersk is watching, vessel, and you load it with Nike trainers, give yourself 3 seconds to guess how many pairs of Nike trainers fit on that vessel. Can you remember the answer? He can't remember the answer. 64 million pairs of trainers on one vessel, fully loaded. So that's what Maersk does. Scale is there, and completely global.
Okay, that's enormous scale, and you told me all sorts of stories about what it's like to unload one of those ships. That's crazy, all those robots and automation and thousands of trucks coming into the port at the same time. So
if you think about a ship arriving, it's got 18,000 containers on, fully loaded. There's 18,000 trucks have to arrive to move it, if they're all moved by truck, obviously. So there you go.
Okay, so there's enormous scale here. We're at a data conference, obviously, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that enormous scale translates into data. Like, what are these data sources? Where are you getting data from? What are you tracking? Things like that.
Well, if you consider the journey of something, we'll just take a random place, let's say China to the UK, huge amount of data, starting with the first order of when is this truck or whatever it is likely to arrive at the port. Everything is tracked, and it's actually not so much vast size of data often, but the complexity. So if you imagine a single vessel, 18,000 containers, those containers are going to different places on the journey. They're full of different goods that have to pass different customs regimes. Within an individual container, they can be split into pallets. Within a pallet, it can be split into different things. So for those of you familiar with JSON, some of our JSON payloads are just absolutely huge and extraordinarily complex. So as much as the volume, which we get from IoT devices, so if you're shipping meat from Argentina, it obviously has to be refrigerated or it ends up not quite as fresh as it should be. Every couple of minutes, those containers are sending what's the temperature, what's the state of play for the refrigeration unit, etc. So it's vast, the amounts of data that we're ingesting, and very complex as well.
Okay, and so I know 10 years ago data wasn't such a central part of the company's strategy or day-to-day execution. Now data is very important, and as part of that transition, you've also had to modernize your data architecture, right? Your entire stack. and of course Dremio is now a key part of that. Can you share a little bit about that modernization, what it looked like before, what it looks like today, what role Dremio is playing in that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, let's talk about the actual journey. In my experience, as many years in tech, it's important to have a vision more than the product. And we're quite lucky. Big shout out to our CTIO, Navneet Kapoor, who is really a visionary type of guy. When I joined Maersk 4 years ago, everything was pretty much legacy. And when I say legacy, I mean like real legacy, with FTPs moving around daily refreshes of what was almost a traditional data warehouse. He gave us the license to deliver something very different. We've now got a data lake, and it's surrounded by increasingly a data mesh. We split into what we call platforms, so one might be customs, one might be shipping, one might be rail, etc., etc. And each of those components within the mesh is now processing, ingesting, and then increasingly delivering that data both into the lake so it can be used. And it's been a journey from really mainframes, as I say, with daily exports at best, sometimes every 3 hours if they were really hot people. And now we're moving, by the end of this year, I would say maybe 80% of our data will be event-driven, coming from Kafka, trickled into the lake, and obviously multi-temporal, so we can do queries as at a certain time.
Cool. And I think you were telling me earlier about how you're even taking kind of unstructured data now with all these new LLMs available to basically take that unstructured data like contracts, right, turn it into fields that you can actually query with a SQL engine like Dremio.
Yeah, I mean, so we're doing a whole bunch of LLMs, as I'm sure everybody here is. For example, the majority of our contracts under $1 million are now negotiated by AI. So you don't have to ring up a human being, you don't have to do that. It's a really quite a cool thing to do. And it means that for people doing a lot of repeat business, where it's the same terms, it's the same custom terms, etc., it's really made life a lot easier for them. And one particular project we're now working on is, again, contracts, where we're extracting the data from contracts, taking the structured data, putting it into Dremio, the unstructured data into vector databases, and then taking those embeddings, and somebody from a single interface can say, when is my shipment due, what does the contract look like, and are there any special customs terms that have to be delivered on arrival? And it will come back with a neat summary of it and put in the structured data as well as the unstructured data. And they do it all from an LLM interface that we've built ourselves, because you guys didn't build it in time, but I'm not going to give you too much shit about that on stage. Somebody will have to bleep that as well, won't they, when they do the editing? Yeah. But it's actually not that complex. We've basically got an internal OpenAI model, so we bounce the SQL off of that internally, check it, send it the database schema, back it comes. Users like it, so at the end of the day, if the users like it, I'm happy.
So generally, the customer is always right. In this case, they're wrong. Dremiocloud does have actually
DremioCloud does, yeah.
Text to SQL.
I'll give you
built
that.
into the product with OpenAI and a few other use cases like automatic documentation,
I don't want to be too
labeling
kind
of
to
data.
him, right? You've got to have some interplay, otherwise it's dull.
That's okay. That's okay. Another thing that you was important to you is having kind of an open data architecture, right? I think a lot of you think probably about those kinds of things when you're building kind of a platform for the enterprise, right? How to make sure you're not getting locked in, how to make sure you're not putting your data in a situation where you're kind of dependent on a single vendor. For us, that's meant really doubling down on apacheiceberg as the kind of the open table format. It was created by Netflix, Apple, but many of the companies here now, the vendors like Dremio and Snowflake and Amazon are behind it. Why was it important to you as a large enterprise to use technologies like Iceberg and Parquet to store your data?
Well, I think being open is really central to how we see our future. So open source in as many places as we can. That's for several reasons. The primary reason is to avoid lock-in. Exactly right. Previous tools that we've used before Dremio were very much what I would classify as pay-per-consumption tools. And then the second model that was tried to adopt it was, tell us how much money you're going to save or make, and we'd like to charge you a percentage of that as our fee. That doesn't interest me. When I negotiate a contract, I want to pay a flat price, do what I want with it. It's my business what we do with it. The parallel being, if you go and buy a car from Mercedes, they don't charge you more if you're driving the king around versus if you're driving me around, right? You pay for it. So being open means that we can move technologies if we need to, and actually we can influence them as well. Just in the front row there is Graham, big little wave, Graham. He's one of our tech gurus. He'll be contributing, for example, to the iceberg movement and get that moving. And we really want to be part of that because we like to control our destiny and not get locked into what somebody else thinks our destiny should be.
Yeah. We see that kind of across our entire customer base. We have hundreds of enterprise customers, and that wanting to avoid getting locked in and wanting to have a format that also is not developed by a single vendor, right? So it's not unlike say Datalake, which is like built and managed and controlled by a single vendor. Iceberg is really a vendor agnostic format, right? So a lot of obviously benefits for you as a user of that, but also just in terms of the ecosystem you benefit from.
And I think it's important for it to be real open source as well, right? There's a whole bunch of open source projects out there where if you look at the number of contributors, it's approximately one or one and their dog. That to me isn't open source. If you haven't got multiple contributors to it, is it really open source? And to me, it isn't. So again, it's another reason for choosing Iceberg. But if any of you do want to find out more about Iceberg, Graham's down there, and he'll tell you how he's planning to use it, because he's way smarter than me in many ways, in every way.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about now how you're using Dremio. What have the results been? How that's contributed to this overall new data architecture that you have?
Well, how are we using Dremio? So we've managed to reduce our reliance very significantly on other tools. Obviously, I'm not going to mention the tools here. It wouldn't be right. We tend to think in terms of ROI. So our ROI is about 7 to 1. Every dollar we spend, we're saving 7, which to me is quite golden. We don't have a spectacularly sophisticated set of users. They really want to know relatively simple SQL queries in the main, and then we're taking that data, obviously, and driving AI models around the outside edge of it. So it's in use everywhere from, believe it or not, business resilience, disaster recovery, where we're taking small sets of data, moving them to a second cloud, having that all locked off so that if we have a primary cloud failure, we can spin it up very quickly. Right the way through, as I said, contracts, all of our shipment movements, air and freight logistics, like right the way through the organization. We've gone from really a startup phase, if you like, 6 months ago, where we had maybe 50 users. We project by the end of the year, if we take into account downstream users as well, we'll have 5,000 direct Dremio users and products that are delivered from Dremio, probably in the region of 15,000. We've done that, and we've got a really small team. I'm very, blessed to have both a small team and a smart team. So believe it or not, there are only 7 people in our team. So I think that's pretty amazing to have products that are that scalable, that reliable, with that few people. Now, we're not building all of the products. Obviously, there are bunches of people around it that can build it. But for me, that's really important. It's got to be light touch. And it's got to be approachable for the users. And in general, we find that that's the sweet spot.
Cool. Always makes me happy as a founder to hear these success stories, right? Having thousands of users, the impact that it's having on the business, but also more importantly that you can do it with a small team and get to those results fast, because if it's a 5-year journey with 100 people having to manage the thing, then that's not very good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important, for me, it's really important to have the plugins to you and your tech team. And it's one of the things, and I will say this just as a favor to you, these guys are really easy to work with. I really mean that. You can get access to the people you need to get access to. You're not behind layers of bureaucracy to find the person that you can actually get in a room with and beat them up if it doesn't work. And I'm pleased to say I've beaten you up on at least 3 occasions now, and it's been very enjoyable for me. So.
Cool. And it sounds like from a previous comment that we're leaving money on the table, so we can talk about that later too.
Something about that.
So what suggestions do you have for the folks in the audience here when they think about how to modernize their data architecture, how to evolve it to meet the needs of 2023, the kind of use cases that people have now with data? You obviously have many, many different use cases within the company.
Well, I think as I alluded to earlier, the first place to start is your vision. Don't start with technology. If you start with technology, you'll just do what we've done for the last 40 years, deliver a load of technology, and the users or whoever will say, hey, this is great, but I don't know what you're talking about, and it doesn't work for me. So start with the vision. Make sure you're out actually mixing it with the users. Half the time the tech is, I've been an ex-techie myself. It's cool to play with technology, right? And if you ask a coder what the best thing to a solution is, it's pretty much always write code. And most of the time it isn't, okay? Because you want to be understanding what the users want. So start there, work backwards from there. If we did our journey again now, and as I say, we're like 12 months into it. If we did our journey again, I would start much more even than we did, focused on outcomes. Before we bought any tools, before we put any tools into place, I'd really work with the business and make sure they understand what they want. The rules haven't changed. For those of you, how old am I? I'm 59 now, right? So, geez, nearly 60. But the rules haven't changed, I don't think, since the day I started. Techies are lousy at asking the business what they want. And even today, I hear people say, oh, the business don't want what they want, I know what they want. Come on, get real. This is simple stuff. Once you work out what the business want, then work out how to deliver it. But be open, stay open, and in my opinion, be aware that there is a tsunami coming of AI, and that is going to change the nature of all data solutions that you're delivering. I think you'll see a ton of machine-to-machine interaction, and the concept for us, for example, of eyes on glass, of people slicing and dicing information and looking to find their way to what should we be doing on the basis of what I can see on the screen. That's actually trying to drive your business through the rearview mirror. And anybody here that drives, it's not a clever way of driving a car, right? You want to be looking ahead. And that's what I think will be that's what's the most important thing for me is how are you going to predict the future, work with the users so they understand what can be done, and then build an open data stack on the basis of that.
Cool. So I know we were promised a timer here, so we would know how much time is left, but we didn't get the timer.
I don't know. Got no idea at all. Anybody know what the time is?
Do we have time for Q&A?
We've got 2 minutes. We can answer one question.
All right, we do have a few minutes.
What was our budget? I won't give you the monetary. I won't give you the monetary figure, but let's just say a lot less than he wanted me to pay. And how do we stick to it? I think sticking to budgets is actually relatively easy if you've got people within your team that you can trust. Like, I don't think I ever asked Graham or any of my team, don't spend anything, but they know what budgetary constraints we're working to. And I think you get a lot more results from people as a leader, if that's what I am. Who knows what I count as, but I think you get a lot more from people by being completely honest with them and saying, these are the constraints I work with, and trusting them to do the right thing. And being open with the users as well and saying, look, if we put this tech in and you don't get trained, this is what happens to cost. So unless you want your cost to rise, invest in training. It's a thing that people often forget. They completely say, oh, everybody is tech savvy. People aren't tech savvy. I'm sorry, even today, they're not tech savvy. I bet most people don't even know how to use their iPhone properly. People do the basics, and that's how they get by. So that's how I stick to budget. Combination of trust, great team, and working really heavily with the users to train them to make sure that they're literate.
Yeah, and obviously, from your standpoint, the budget is more than just Dremio, right? It includes how many people are working on the project, all the other tools. I think one of the things that many people underestimate is the kind of how much more cost efficient it is to use kind of an open data architecture, right? Where you're not kind of locked into a single vendor that has all the pricing power, right? And I know something we put on our website recently is kind of that kind of comparison, and some other examples from a variety of different industries of what that saved our customers, right? Just having that kind of an approach to
and it's about being flexible, right? So don't get yourself locked in and say, we've only got this tool and this tool. So we didn't know, we were doing nothing with DBT. We're now getting quite into using DBT again with the open source version of it. That's saving us a stack of money. And I think, it's a very overused term, be agile, think agile. But I do genuinely believe that is not just how you do budgets, how you do projects. If you think of your own personal life, I bet there's nobody here that thinks in 5-year terms what car, well, maybe people what car they're driving, but you don't think in 5-year terms of what pair of shoes you're buying or anything like that. And if you do, and you do think too long term, it's often a bit of a disaster. Segue to my football club, Chelsea. We've got a 10-year plan, we just don't have a 6-month plan, but we will need a plan for playing in the championship next year if we don't do something. So there we go.
Other questions? You're going to have to yell.
Christ knows I'm going to hear you, but give it a go. I can't even hear him.
Hi. Guessing you can hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the example you gave was measuring kind of the temperature of containers for something like shipping meat overseas,
Yep.
You don't want it to go bad, so you monitor the temperature, and obviously that's time series data. Why did you opt for the combination of Dremio and apacheiceberg as opposed to something else open source, such as Timescale DB, that's a PostgreSQL time series database that might have already worked with the kind of, the tech stack and the skill set that you have in your team already?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is we wanted to keep the stack as small as we can, number one. And number two, if you look at the time series that we've got, think about the containers. Yes, 18,000 containers per vessel is a lot of containers, but the number of refrigerated containers is relatively small. The number of individual rows that are pushed out of it is relatively small. So there are more advantages for us in having a single reduced stack than having multiple products. That's how I view it, because it means you don't have to train people on different things, and then you're not assembling it in different places. But of course, I'm not saying we're necessarily right, but that's how we see it. That's our approach.
It's actually one of the reasons we're adding vector capabilities now to Iceberg and to our platform, right? The ability to index vectors and perform semantic search, because a lot of people need those capabilities and don't necessarily want to have to deploy yet another database, yet another piece of infrastructure that they need to manage and deal with. Other questions?
Cool. We're done.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you
thanks,
so much.
Mark, for being here.
A pleasure.